17th day, middle wind month, 1 CE. What's a breeder? Tyra nearly spat out the straw in her mouth. She's opening with that? From the shadows of a nearby alley, Tyra monitored Liam and Say's progress as they investigated the situation of the town and the disposition of its people, which included hundreds of displaced rural folk from the west. To her annoyance, the town and its surrounding lands were ruled by a clan of Gao. Fortunately, they were a civilian clan and they lacked the extra keen senses of the warrior clan's hunters. She could at least loiter near crowded areas without being pestered. The three women Say was speaking with exchanged worried looks. "Where did you hear that from, dear?" one of them asked. "Was it from one of those beast men?" Say nodded wordlessly. The dark-haired woman in the middle of the trio raised a hand to her cheek, looking Say up and down. "Have you bled yet?" she asked in a low voice. Say visibly hesitated, looking around with just a hint of a blush on her cheeks. "Not bad." The girl nodded. Another one of the women clicked her tongue. "Those damn dogs," she grated. "We can't ever." The speaker jerked suddenly. She turned a cross look at the woman who had elbowed her, then quieted down as a group of Gao walked by. "There's nowhere to run," the woman said after the Gao went out of sight. Just try to hide it for as long as you can." "Did it happen while you were asleep?" another asked. "Make sure you burn your sheets if so." "Anything with blood on it," the third woman added. "And make sure you keep everything washed good and clean. They can't tell exactly how old you are, so you can probably keep them from sending you for at least a little while." Say's eyes went from speaker to speaker. She wore an unknowing expression as if she were trying to guess at their implications. Seeing this, one of the women started to weep quietly, holding a hand over the bump on her belly. "Say, why'd you stop?" As if on cue, or likely on that cue, Liam came up to them. Say's mouth worked as she avoided his gaze. It's nothing," one of the women smiled. "Is she your sister?" Liam nodded. "Where did you come from?" she asked. "Closer to the big river," he answered. "They made us leave our village." "Is what they're saying true?" "About the undead? We didn't see anything like that." "None of the other people I've spoken with have," the woman replied. "It makes you wonder." "About what?" The woman looked up and down the street before leaning in closer. "Maybe it's almost over. Maybe the theocracy's come." Tyra held in a snort. "Well, that totally slipped my mind." With the beastmen acting the way they were, more than a few people would suspect that they were retreating from something. Well, they did state what they were supposedly keeping the people safe from, but an undead horde had never managed to get through the Dead March before. Not many would believe the beastmen's claim without seeing it firsthand. What the people were accustomed to, however, was having the theocracy drive the beastmen away during major incursions. That history would guide their assumptions to a theocracy counteroffensive being underway. But was that a good thing, or a bad thing? It was good in the sense that these people were more than willing to believe that help was on the way, but that help wouldn't come in the form that they expected. Trying to convince people that the beings who were believed to devour their souls would be coming to deliver them from those who devoured their bodies was a long shot to take. "Wouldn't the beastmen just eat and run?" one of the women said. "That's what's happened every other time. Why'd they move people around like this?" "They're looking to settle this time, yeah? We're not prey anymore, we're livestock. If something bad was coming, you'd hide your chickens, too." "Not that we have any chickens left." A snort followed the woman's comment, and a short round of laughter rose into the afternoon air. Even the one that was weeping just moments before joined them. Only in the Draconic Kingdom could the common people be so cavalier about their situation. Maybe when the undead came around to drive away the beastmen, they'd just stand in the streets and cheer for the undead. Liam bobbed his head to the women before leading Say away. They disappeared around the street corner and reappeared on the far side of the alley, walking up to Tyra. "Why'd you go and ask that?" Tyra eyed Say. "To make them feel bad for me," Say replied with a straight face. "They all have babies on the way, so it puts me on their side. Otherwise, I'd just be a random kid. After I said what I did, I was a kid that needed to be protected from what they were forced to go through." "What kind of monster are you raising, Alway?" Not that it was bad. Agents like Alway, and apparently Say, were worth more than 1,000 muscle-brained thugs in most situations. Assassins were experts at deception and infiltration, but very few focused on that side of things as much as they did. Even Tyra only used the various techniques and skills in that field as a supplement to her more violent way of accomplishing objectives. They retreated deeper into the alley, returning to the dark and dead end that they currently called home. Tattered lengths of patchwork caught the water dripping from the eaves. Most of the citizens being moved back from the front lines opted to gather at the makeshift shelters raised around the town, but a private place to confer was required for their work. "Is that a ninja technique, big brother?" Liam asked. "Oh, so you won't call me sister, but brother is fine?" "It's an assassin technique," Tyra replied. Currently, she didn't appear as a young woman, but as a wiry man in his late teens. As long as she evaded the direct notice of the local beastmen, they wouldn't bug her about not being pregnant or mark her as their next meal. "Is it magic?" "Yep. Fits under spiritual category, magic or whatever. Magical researchers lump assassin techniques and ninjutsu in with talismancy, geomancy, and all of that Eastern stuff." Not that it mattered. What mattered was that it worked. "Does that mean assassins and ninjas are from the East?" "I think so. My great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather came from somewhere out east with platinum. I guess he got nice and cozy after the demon gods and decided to set up shop here instead of going home." "Can I use assassin techniques yet?" Liam asked, aside from studying. "Yep," Tyra answered. "You'll have to study for it, though." "Why does everything lead to studying?" Liam muttered. Tyra grinned and plopped herself down against the wall. She rummaged through the pack she had stashed away there for summer lunch. "I don't think it's the same as studying under Director Alpha," Tyra said. "You can use any techniques that you learn as long as you have mana. You're not going to forget them. The weaker version is illusion school magic that works off of your regular appearance. It's just like any other illusion, though observant or powerful people might be able to see through it. Won't work so well on people that don't rely on those senses, either. When you get stronger, there's a transmutation school version that can physically alter your appearance into any creature of the same type, any humanoid, in our case. That's the one I'm using right now." They settled down for their meal, which fortunately hadn't gone soggy from their long trek through the rain. Liam and Say's first test interaction felt like it went well enough, so they would go ahead with their investigation after lunch. "So," Tyra said, "what are you going to ask about next?" "The breeder thing," Say replied. Tyra shifted at her response. "Look, I know that you're probably getting to around that age, but that's a pretty weird thing to get interested in. Just saying." She took a bite out of her bread, trying to work some saliva into it. "Kids these days were just..." "But it's a problem, right?" Say said. "The way those women acted when I asked about it, they're probably being bred like livestock too. What happens to them once the Royal Army takes this place back?" Tyra's chewing slowed, then stopped. How many people did they say were on the Beastman side of the line again? Most of them would be women with how the Beastmen managed the human population. If what Say was talking about was happening everywhere, the Draconic Kingdom had nearly 2 million pregnant women to deal with. If the breeder thing had been happening since the beginning of the occupation, most would be on their second kid. "It can't be that bad, right?" Liam said. They can't just." "They could," Tara said. "Threats would work on most people in this situation. Get pregnant or die, or get her pregnant or we kill her. Not everyone has the same boundaries, either. Some are little better than animals when it comes to that sort of thing. Others might just give up and go with the flow when they realize that they can't get themselves out of it." Ultimately, it had little to do with the upcoming operation by the Royal Army, but the Draconic Kingdom would probably appreciate a bit of forewarning. "Shiom, this is Raven's Nest. Report." The dry voice of an elder lich rasped in her head. Tyra raised her hand to her ear. "We're in. Just starting to sniff around, though. Any additional orders?" "None. However, be advised, a general advance may begin in 3 days. Prioritize your tasks accordingly." "Got it." The message ended. Its range limitations aside, she couldn't figure out why it was taboo for most places to rely on the spell. There was no way Gattenbard could have happened so easily. "What did they say?" Liam asked. "Just the routine check-in," Tyra answered. "We need to focus on getting the info the army needs, though. Something might happen in a few days." "But you can't hurry up with this kind of work," Say said. It's not like we know exactly who has the right information. And if we ask too much of the same thing, we're going to get noticed. You're right, Tyra said, but we still have to do what we can. Fieldwork is rarely nice and neat, and perfect never happens. Let's go. They left the deep alleys and returned to the main streets. With the weather as miserable as it was, their options for gleaning information were limited. Both the Draconic Kingdom's citizens and the Beastmen appeared to share the same custom of shutting themselves in during the torrential rains of the season, making the job that much more annoying. In a normal situation, the usual option was talking to people visiting the market, but they couldn't loiter since the season made one grab what they needed and go back home. Another was to visit the shelters raised around the town. Finally, they could eavesdrop on people. Since Tyra was mostly free to operate, she could do the latter, which included spying on the local beastmen. She was still concerned about how Liam and Say would do, however, so she stuck around them for a while longer. Liam's, or rather, Say's, next destination was a sheltered area raised on the northern end of the town. It was essentially a collection of tarps strung out between the buildings on either side of the street. Groups of people divided the space for limited privacy, but most preferred to mingle with those nearby when they weren't resting. You two new here? The tallest out of a group of young men standing at the entrance of the area looked down at them. We just got here, Say said. Just the two of you? We came with our big brother, but he got lost in the rain. Wait a minute. Lost, huh? The man sighed, then stepped aside. Don't worry, we'll take care of you. That little, she just killed me off. I'm your boss, damn it. Say sniffed and nodded. She and her surviving brother shuffled past the men into the shelter. Did she plan on staying there? Tyra recalled the reports of her work in the Holy Kingdom. When Say was given an assignment, she went deep. Her work in the safe houses in Helama and Fallujah was frighteningly single-minded. Was that always influence as well? Tyra looked around, trying to figure out how to get an ear on their conversations within. So far, the Royal Army's reconnaissance rated the Beastmen's detection ability as broadly low, with no notable individuals that could foil her concealment. This wasn't a surprise to her, as she already knew that demi-humans tended to pay for their physical superiority with deficits in skill compared to their human counterparts. Without exceptional scouts of their own, detecting a ninja in the realm of heroes would require them to literally step on her. Let's not get stepped on, then. She scaled the wall and made her way along the rooftops. As usual, the Thieves' Highway was devoid of travelers. Not that anyone would have enjoyed using it in the pouring rain. You two look absolutely miserable. Here, have some Leaf's armor. Liam and Say were about a quarter of the way into the shelter. They were standing under one of the larger covered areas, which appeared to be a communal kitchen. A plate was handed to each of them, loaded with stuffed grape leaves. Given their situation, they were probably filled with beans, ground grains, and the early fruits of the season. Despite having just eaten, the two children wolfed down the steamed rolls. A woman smiled and placed some more on their plates. "Hey, are you sure?" Liam stared at the food. "Of course." The woman responded warmly, "There's always more." "If anyone's going hungry," another woman said, "it's the Beastmen. They have to ration, while we feast every week." Smug grins appeared around the tables. "They should have let us keep our livestock," Say said. "I'm sure everyone everywhere told them that," someone said, "but they had their own ideas. If there's something this whole occupation's taught us, it's that predators make for poor farmers." "Still a shame, though," another woman shook her head. "It's gonna take a long time getting our flocks and herds back to the way they were when this is all over." "When's it going to be over?" Say asked. "I'd say soon," one of the few men answered. "This big hubbub must mean something. I wouldn't be surprised if angels come diving out of the sky any day now. Even if it takes longer, we just have to look on the bright side of things." "I don't see any bright side," Say frowned. "Well, it's mostly adult stuff. You're too young to need to care about it. The Beastmen don't charge rent or collect taxes." "But they eat us," Liam said. "That they do," the man nodded. "But we get eaten either way. The difference is, when we're under the nobles, the Beastmen bash our doors down. When we're under the Beastmen, they knock." Chuckles rose from around the dining area. "He's right," a woman said, "there ain't no such thing as living to a ripe old age." "So you'd rather be under the Beastmen?" Liam asked. Hey, now, the man held up his hands. I didn't say that. I just said we have to look on the bright side of things. Under the beastmen, we're stuck. Worse than stuck. They're all ass backwards and we get dragged down with them. Pruning vines with your fingernails, plowing a field with a stick, no draft animals to pull things around. Well, I shouldn't have to tell you any of that, and it's no good to complain about things you can't change. It just drags you and everyone around you down. I hope you're right about it being over soon, Say said. We all do, kid, the man said, we all do. Liam and Say finished their meal and went to clean their plates. The general positivity and resilience of the Draconic Kingdom's citizens appeared to remain constant even in its long-occupied territories. There was something else expressed in their words and attitudes, however, something Tyra had seen elsewhere that was common to many species. These people are used to getting out of trouble. As an assassin, it was subconscious behavior that she had learned to exploit to great effect, for both herself and her targets. In the Draconic Kingdom, it appeared to be the foundation of their insane resilience. All at once, the weird behavior of the country's citizens suddenly made a whole lot more sense. After overhearing several more conversations, Tyra left Liam and Say to their investigation. Despite Say's age, the people were defenseless against the young bard. In theory, it should have been expected as the strong in the Draconic Kingdom were eliminated first, but it was still good to see it play out in practice nonetheless. Tyra made her way over the clay-tiled rooftops, occasionally stopping to take inventory of the town's denizens and how they interacted with the occasional beastman. Encounters were always initiated by the beastmen. For the humans' part, they showed no outward signs of hostility, simply complying with the demands made of them. Despite the citizens' docile behavior, the beastmen always appeared in groups. This suggested that they had something to be wary of, or maybe they just naturally moved around in packs. They were something like dogs, after all. An hour's wandering finally had her settle in over the town square, near what looked like the office that the beastmen managed the town from. There, she waited, squatting under the eaves of a third-floor dormer, sifting through the conversations that floated up from the plaza. Several dozen beastmen occupied the area and the town's residents stayed well away, so she hoped she would catch something exclusive to the beastmen's side of things. After several hours of listening to hundreds of mundane interactions, a group of especially drenched Gao came in from outside the square. The leader shook his brown coat free of water before stepping in to stand before the local lord. Those guys up north are complaining again. Which ones? Oh. Them. What's it about now? Too many humans. With the warrior clans away, they're worried that something might happen. What are they, mice? It isn't as if the tribes managing those humans didn't come along with them. We're not even singling them out or anything, everyone's got the same ratio. I don't see why we can't send them further east. There's plenty of room to go around. Ugh, why are we even working during the deluge? Even the humans take a break. You know their answer. Oh, those shipments we were talking about before came in. Tyra leaned forward at the out-of-place tangent. You didn't try the stuff out right away? Nope. Not like we have any problems. Can I test it? On them, I mean. Be my guest. They said to mix it in with their water, so just dump it into one of the wells. Let me know how it works out. If it goes into the wells, what do we drink? That's why I said one of the wells. It's not supposed to affect us, but it doesn't hurt to be safe. Right. Tyra detached herself from the dormer and shadowed the Gao and his party from above. They made their way to the warehouses a few blocks away from the town square, stopping at one with a pair of wide double doors. The Gao motioned to his companions, and they pulled them open. A long, rusty squeal filled the air as the doors came open to reveal the mess on the other side. The doors' locks were shattered and their bracings, splintered. The slots for the drawbars were broken open and their guides hung loosely from bent screws. Someone needs to teach these guys how to use a door. 3 wagons loaded with burlap sacks were parked within. The lead Gao walked over to the first, sniffing curiously at the mysterious cargo. Doesn't smell like anything out of the ordinary to me, maybe that's why it doesn't work on us? What's it supposed to do? One of the Gao asked. They just called it a suppressant, the leader answered, so maybe the humans will fall asleep. Guess we shouldn't use it all at once. Everyone, grab a sack. The pack moved to do as he bid. Tyra stuck her head out from the eaves, trying to get a better look. Won't the humans know we've added something to the water? The guy that came here to talk about it didn't say anything about that. But he did say that the humans would like the stuff. Well, isn't that nice? I hope they appreciate what we're doing. Each cow hefted a sack on its shoulders and left the warehouse. A few leaned into the warehouse door to close it shut. Tyra dropped down behind the leading door as they did so, quickly retreating into the shadows of the interior. She waited for a full minute after the cow left before coming out to check the wagons. Let's see. She held a cloth over her mouth and nose, pressing down on one of the sacks with her free hand. Traces of dried vegetation wafted into the air. She narrowed her eyes at the familiar scent, drawing a dagger to work apart the seams of the sack. Her gloved hand entered the opening, pulling out what she expected to see. Well, shit. Tyra checked through the other wagons to confirm their contents. She stuffed a few samples into one of her pouches before heading to the side door. After a quick scan of the alley outside, she left the building and returned to the rooftops. It took her a few minutes to run across the town and locate Liam and Say. A rare reprieve in the incessant rains had brought the citizens out to enjoy the evening, and Say was near the center of the growing crowd. Liam stood off to the side. She dropped down into the alley behind him, coming up to place a hand on his shoulder. Brother? Tyra's fingers moved at her hip. We're going. Grab your sister. What happened? Just go. She tapped her fingers on her waist impatiently as she waited for Liam to return with Say. When they did, she turned and walked away without a word. Did I do something wrong? Say asked. Tyra stopped and stared up at the darkening sky. No, she sighed. You were doing great. I had nothing to complain about. Almost. Almost? Don't worry about it. I'm getting you two back to our side. But why? The Beastmen are worried they're going to lose control of the humans, so they're sedating the population. It involves poisoning the water supply, so it won't be safe for you two to operate here anymore. They made their way over the wall and jogged through the waterlogged fields until the town disappeared over the horizon. A flash of azure briefly lit the darkness as Tyra used a message scroll. Raven Princess, this is Shion. I'm in an audience with the Queen at the moment. What's the matter? They're using Lera on the citizens out here. What? Lady Zaradnik's outburst rang in Tyra's head. She could swear she could feel the noblewoman's ire all the way from Felicia. It ain't the cheap crap that they grow in Riastais, either. These people are getting the real stuff. They're going straight to the moon. How prevalent is its usage? The Beastmen closest to the front just started getting deliveries of the stuff. It's coming from further east, so they might already be employing it out there. I'll have the staff check with the agents deeper in. Why would they do this? I can't imagine that they profit from it like some criminal syndicate. They already own everything. It's because of what Lera does. They treat humans as livestock. All livestock needs to do is eat, shit, and have babies, and Lera keeps humans docile and compliant. Doesn't matter if they turn as dumb as a brick so long as they're edible. That's why Lera entered circulation in the first place. It's a product for markets that consume humans. A long sigh sounded over the message. How are the kids? They're with me. I'm bringing them back to our side before heading in again. Good. Thank you, Shion. Oh, since it's like this, I'm aborting your current mission. Pick up your equipment and head to River Garden. I'll get back to you with the details later. Sure thing, boss. The message spell ended. Tyra focused on the way ahead. Who are you talking to? Liam asked. Captain Zaradnik, Tyra answered. She was with the Queen, too. What did she say? Not much. She just asked some questions, but this is the first time I've ever heard her anywhere close to mad. Too bad you two won't be around to enjoy the show. Can the corruption be fixed, Papa? The Brightness Dragon Lord's movements paused for a moment before he continued his work. I don't know, drawled Dylan. None of the hardest questions in life have easy answers. I can only continue to try. Deep under Oraculon Palace, Dylan watched as her great-grandfather paced slowly around the secluded chamber. She had sensed that it was there since she was young, but she could never figure out how to reach the place. The answer turned out to be through an underwater tunnel in the river, which had been buried in over a century of silt. Despite their great size and the space that they demanded to live comfortably, dragons were very good at hiding their lairs. Except it wasn't his lair, it was hers. Or, rather, the lair meant for the Dragon Lord that would hopefully be born one day to rule over what was commonly known as the Draconic Kingdom. Admittedly, it was far too spacious for a human-sized Dragon Lord to live in. And too damp. It was nice and cool, however, and she could see herself retreating to its depths whenever the days grew too hot to bear. Unfortunately, she couldn't for the life of her figure out how to get any furniture inside. For the time being, it was a place for her to practice. Beyond that, it was a place to craft. Primal sorcery was unlike the tier magic of the present day. Mastering it was nowhere near as simple, but its greatest feats were far beyond what tier magic could ever hope to achieve. She was still learning to wield it in a rudimentary manner, so fashioning more complex things would have to wait until later. Dylan watched as wisps of primal energy wove themselves into a series of complex formations. No, it wasn't so much watched as felt. While not a perfect comparison, primal sorcerers were much like the regular sorcerers who deftly wielded tier magic through force of will and personality rather than clumsily grabbing at it through rationalization and study. Platinum won't get mad that you're showing me this, will he? The magic of the world belongs to the world, Dylan. We Dragon Lords are each simply caretakers in our own little way. Even for the more meddlesome fellows like Saint Orcus, there is nothing to be angry over. We can only be content that another one of us has appeared after so long. Also, I always mentioned that you'd be better at this than he is. She wasn't so sure about that. It was all she could do to influence the reality about herself. The Platinum Dragon Lord could blast chunks of the continent into glass if he wanted to. Some would carelessly say that she was capable of little more than cantrips, but wild magic didn't work that way. Dylan understood its advantages over tier magic, but, as a weak practitioner of wild magic, she could only envy the ease by which tier magic casters could gain power and produce results. Say, Papa, is the corruption truly so terrible? I understand that it's alien, but the world still has its stories, right? Her great-grandfather stopped again. He looked over at her, and, after a long moment, he sighed. Perhaps one needs to have been there before it happened to understand the corruption in all of its depth. Like everyone else who came into existence after the corruption set in, you were born inside the cage that formed out of it. All you know is the cage, and there is no other reality by which to make comparisons. The strands of primal energy around the Brightness Dragon Lord tied themselves off. He came over to sit on a rock beside Dylan's, his 7-colored robe settling about him. Before the corruption, he told her, everyone was free. Free to choose the path that they wished to take, then change that path if they felt like it. There were no limits, nothing that naturally bound one to the steps of a certain path. A farmer could become a blacksmith and then a singer and a soldier if they felt like it. How good they were at anything was only limited by the resources and effort they were willing to put in. That doesn't sound any different from now, Dylan frowned. Her great-grandfather snorted. What happens now is but a shoddy imitation of what came before, little wormling. Before, someone who learned how to farm was simply someone who developed their knowledge and skills in agriculture. Now, they are a farmer. Little wormling. A twinge of sadness twisted within her. He called her that less and less as time went by. It was a sign that their time together, filled with his lessons that were so filled with mystery and wonder, would soon come to an end. When he finally left, only Dylan would remain. I don't understand. Well, since you're so obsessed with your budget recently, consider it along those lines. I'm not obsessed with the royal budget, Papa. Dylan's face twisted sourly. I hate it. It's like my enemy. Her great-grandfather's chuckle echoed off of the chamber's walls. Then focus your ire on this example. Imagine that every soul in existence is allocated a certain budget at birth. Some were born with 10 coins, others, more. The vast majority tend to have a smaller budget. Every time one commits themselves to advance in a vocation, they spend one of their coins. If they spend them all, then they have become all that they will ever be. Some will reach the end of their stories without spending all of their coins. They don't even know that the coins exist, while others may spend everything before they mature into adults. Can't they earn more coins? Dylan asked. No, the Brightness Dragon Lord shook his head sadly. What they are born with is all that they will ever have. The implications of his allegory were not lost on her. But that means the stories of the world. That's right, Draw Dylan. The stories of the world, once gifted with infinite potential, have become chained and caged. And this is not the only atrocity that the corruption has wrought upon us. What else happened? The very nature of things changed. Imagine yourself as a beastman living at the time of that change. You live in an average city in the center of the continent, living an average cosmopolitan life. You have good friends from several different species, including humans. At some point, you find a mate and have your first child, and, to your horror, you find that the child bears little in common with you. She injures your friends' children when you get together, seeing them as prey. The other parents have their own problems, too. Like yours, their children are alien to them, both mentally and physically. And all that is a product of the corruption? Indeed, her great-grandfather said gravely. The realities of an alien existence were arbitrarily imposed on our own. Civilizations all around the world collapsed within a generation because their essential workings no longer applied properly, suffering catastrophic failure. You cannot fathom the pure anarchy that the world evolved into when its denizens were forced to face their new and alien reality. It was not a quick process, either. It is still happening to this very day. Then the beastmen attacking my domain, she said. That's the corruption's fault, too? Fundamentally, yes. It is as if someone arbitrarily decided humans are thus, merfolk are thus, beastmen are thus, giants are thus. His voice trailed off and he looked her in the eye. Dragons are thus, he said softly. She swallowed, eyes wide in stupefied horror. Her great-grandfather sighed. And, so, he said, the vast majority of those who were born after the fact became thus. Eons of evolution and ages of civilization invalidated in a blink of eternity's eye. It's not their fault. It wasn't the beastmen's fault that they were like that. They were forced to be like that. But that meant it wouldn't be right to hate them. She could only be a part of their story. As a dragon lord, it wouldn't be right to use wild magic to destroy them, no more right than it would be to destroy the souls of her people to do so. Her great-grandfather regarded her with a certain look, one that told Draw Dylan that he understood what was going through her mind. He gave her a nod, placing a hand on her head. It's gratifying to know that all my instruction hasn't been for naught, he said. I feared that the mortal side of your lineage would result in a narrow, self-centered worldview, but you appear to understand what is important. If anything, your compassion and love for each and every soul may stay your hand from doing what is necessary. What should I do? What we all do, Draw Dylan. In our limited way, we each try to promote a world where the best stories may be written. Such that they are. In that case, Draw Dylan said, is there any other weird stuff I should be aware of? The hand on her head withdrew. Her great-grandfather rose and returned to his work. I have told you everything you need to know, Draw Dylan, he said with a mysterious smile. It wouldn't do to spoil the rest. You have your own story to write, after all. Do you believe that people have much choice over their lives, Sabos? The Sorcerer King's royal butler did not immediately reply, so Draw Dylan took the opportunity to fork a piece of buttered potato into her mouth. It wasn't a crop grown in the Draconic Kingdom, but as she savored the starchy tuber, she thought it wouldn't be a bad thing to cultivate a few fields for the palace kitchen. I believe it is the choices that we do make rather than the number of choices we have available that are important, Your Majesty. And what is important? Silence fell over the room again. Draw Dylan looked out the window beside her table. The Tower of Felige's central keep offered a commanding view of the city and its surrounding territories, and, from her vantage, it almost appeared as if everything was normal. Since the deluge had arrived in full, people mostly stayed inside, but the sparse number of smoking chimneys spoke of the ravages of the beastman occupation. It depends, Sabos eventually answered. What is important differs from individual to individual, and it is one's associations that often dictate what is possible. With that in mind, I believe the choices that hold the most relevance to the bonds that one maintains are the most important. At her other shoulder, Enna smiled and nodded in agreement. That was to be expected, as all properly raised aristocrats were raised not as individuals, but as members of a house. They were part of a generations-long effort to build something greater than themselves. This thinking wasn't limited to nobles, of course. Anyone that built anything inheritable did their best to make sure that their heirs didn't bring the work of multiple lifetimes to ruin. But not everyone thinks that way, Dylan noted. Some consider those bonds to be nothing more than fetters. I cannot speak for those individuals, Your Majesty, Sabos replied. To be certain, a degree of freedom can be appreciated in anyone's life, but, try as I might, I cannot understand those who live solely for themselves. Also, in a way, those bonds that some consider fetters offer a sort of freedom of their own. Considering his position, Sabos' answer was also understandable. Butlers were nearly always members of the nobility, and Corlin's delegation always addressed him as such. Dylan sighed inside, no closer to an answer to her question than before. The question both did and didn't have to do with what they discussed, but it was a difficult topic to frame for casual conversation. She desired her domain to be a realm where the souls that dwelled within could live their stories to their fullest, and she felt that an integral part of that had to do with breaking free of the rigid, mechanical system that they were trapped in. Well, she couldn't break them free, that was something for more powerful dragon lords to work on, but reshaping or at least redefining the cage to be more conducive to good stories was likely possible for someone like her. By all appearances, the Sorceress Kingdom was a nation that was wise to many of the mysteries of the world, so she had hoped that they might be able to offer an enlightened, yet distinct perspective from that of a dragon lord. Her conversations with various members of their delegation suggested that they had at least a piece of the answer. Baroness Saradnik was even willing to apply her understanding of things to the development of the Draconic Kingdom's military. Still, she did so in a rather roundabout, natural way to avoid looking suspicious. The others guarded their knowledge jealously as nations were wont to do with their competitive advantages. Ah well, there's no point in rushing this. Yorstin. What do we have first this afternoon? Yes, Your Majesty. The ministries have prepared a summary for Fallujah and its surrounding provinces. Dylan rose from her seat. Let's get this over with, then. By the way, is there anything nasty waiting for us? Nothing too far from our expectations, Your Majesty. Well, there's the state of Fallujah's eastern territories, but that's something we've known about for weeks. Ina sent a pair of men ahead of them to prepare the court before checking over Dylan's appearance. 30 minutes later, she assumed her seat in the great hall of the keep. Most of the nobles who had come with her from Orichalon had dispersed into the provinces to organize the recovery efforts, and only the ministers and their aides remained. As short-staffed as they were, all of the aides were pulling double duty as footmen and maids. Your Majesty, Ina said, we've completed our opening assessment of Fallujah and its constituent territories. They are in line with the reconnaissance reports from the Sorceress Kingdom's expeditionary force. Including Fallujah's side of the Forced River Valley, 70% of the population has been lost over the course of the Beastman occupation. What of the court's preparations? Dylan asked. This can hardly be counted as a good thing, but the depleted population means that we've been able to quickly implement our procedures even with fewer administrators. We're also in the midst of the deluge, so it's been easy to keep track of everyone. The citizens are cooperative and looking forward to the recovery of the nation. We must be the only people working right now. Traditionally, the deluge was a holiday. Even the beastmen took a break. What about public health? Can the temples keep up? So long as we don't have any major outbreaks, Your Majesty, Salacia stood up from her bench, the temples are well within their capacity to minister to the people. Also, the Temple of Bounty is doing their usual thing. Dylan nodded. Thus far, every province treated their liberation and ensuing recovery as routine. It was a part of the Draconic Kingdom's culture that tended to confound any foreigner. As far as she knew, no other country could endure what they did, pick themselves up and brush themselves off, and then carry on with a spring in its stride. How's army recruitment? Dylan asked. We're spread pretty thin here. Amod was in the capital. Salacia ended up answering in his place. Marshal Zulu left instructions to at least recruit sufficient numbers for domestic policing duties. A few bards came out of hiding after Fallujah was freed, and I've deployed them to assist. We should handily fill our quota. Dylan nodded. In that case, does anyone have any outstanding issues to bring to our awareness before we dive into the numbers? Yes, Your Majesty. What is it now? The one who spoke up was Mazar Forst, Minister of Rural Development. Like her other ministers, the pale young man looked more than a bit tired. We've received concerning reports from the staff left to manage our affairs in Orichalon, he said. They estimate that roughly 10% of the rural tenants are straying from our production goals. Please elaborate, Minister forced, in a frown. Mazar produced a folded piece of parchment and cleared his throat. According to the department staff in Orakalon, there's a sizable anomaly in the city's seed stock. Jute, cotton and flax are being purchased instead of food staples. I was wondering when that would finally happen. Did we err somewhere? Henna Orban, the Minister of the Economy, asked. Did the citizens notice a deficit or surplus that we did not? They wouldn't do something like that for no good reason. Our staff tracked the source of the odd behavior to the Merchant Guild. The Merchant Guild? This is hardly the time for their games. The Merchant Guild doesn't play games with money, Minister Orban, Zoran Kao noted lightly. But they often believe they can dance around the mandates of Her Majesty's court, Henna replied, then turned his attention back to Mazar. Were they able to dig up any details? The Minister of Rural Development put the piece of paper away. According to the Merchant Guild, he said, they are not going against our mandates and will meet 100% of our production goals. By encouraging our farmers to grow the wrong crops? By cultivating the most profitable crops, Mazar said. Several merchant companies in Orakalon have secured a significant number of grain futures from the Sorceress Kingdom, which will be delivered in advance of our harvest. Additionally, they've written contracts for the various textile crops that they've encouraged the farmers to cultivate this harvest. The money is already in the farmers' pockets. The entire court turned its eyes to the throne. Draw Dillon returned a dispassionate look. Behind her mask of indifference, however, she couldn't help but feel sorry for them. Domestic prices for basic commodities tended to be cheaper than anywhere the Draconic Kingdom could import from. The theocracy was always more expensive, while the transportation and handling costs for commodities from further abroad made the trade not worth the trouble. No matter the country, precedents were heavily relied upon in decision-making processes, so the move by the Merchant Guild completely blindsided her court. The same thing would have probably happened even if it was her old, experienced one. Gazing upon us will not change anything, Draw Dillon said. Mazar swallowed. What should we do, Your Majesty? Is action required? She replied, our court has identified a need. The Merchant Guild has identified the most profitable way to fulfill that need. All parties have acted to optimize the realization of our policy goals. What are your concerns? What if they fail to deliver? Or they cheat us somehow? This is a matter of food security. Considering the usual price of the Sorceress Kingdom's grain exports, Draw Dillon said, failure to deliver is difficult to imagine. As for being cheated, the exchange of futures is under strict regulation by the Merchant Guild. All that aside, the Sorceress Kingdom has been trying to bring us into their camp. Sabotaging their own efforts like that is utterly irrational, and if they wished harm upon us, their army is already inside our borders. But if we allow this trade to flourish, Your Majesty, the Minister of Rural Development said, our domestic industries will shift away from food production to grow cash crops. If something happens in the Sorceress Kingdom, a drought or some other form of crop failure, our people will starve. Intent matters not in that situation. We could raise tariffs, Minister Orban suggested. There is no plausible excuse for such an extreme tariff, Zoran said. Doing so is the same as telling the Sorceress Kingdom to stay out of our markets. A trade war while the Draconic Kingdom is still recovering, or ever, is the last thing we need. You're always quick to produce a counter-argument for everything, Kao. Henna narrowed his eyes, but being lukewarm will not help us here. What solution do you propose to remedy this? If you wish for domestic production to continue, then it must be competitive. As far as I can see, your options are to either allow the lease of undead labor from the Sorceress Kingdom to drive down production overheads, or come up with a similarly cost-effective method. Minister Orban snorted and looked away. Pride is not a solution to this particular problem, Orban, Zoran said. Enough, Lena told them. Kao is right. A country that fights its own, legally operating markets only cannibalizes itself. Similarly, tariffs are politically unwise in our current situation. Taking steps to correct our trade deficit with the Sorceress Kingdom has always been high on our list of priorities, and the Merchant Guild has gone and addressed that problem on their own. Maintaining a trade surplus would be even better. As Corlin's delegation has noted, the Draconic Kingdom has something that the Sorceress Kingdom does not, land. We should be using that land to meet the demands of our new ally while expediting our country's recovery and development at the same time. Thank you, Minister Delarose, Zoran smiled. I wasn't coming to your defense, Kao. Lena rolled her eyes. I was simply stating the facts. We're running a country, not staging some sort of popularity contest. This is turning out rather well. Once prone to sticking with their cliques and constantly referring, and deferring, to the work of their predecessors, the members of her young court were starting to find their own footing. With circumstances so extraordinary, Draudilin wasn't surprised that the collection of rough gems in her care would gain polish so quickly. Soon, she would be able to move on to the next phase in her plans. Her court's proceedings lingered on the topic for a while longer before moving on to the next. The hours passed swiftly, and it was only after Amod entered the hall that she recalled that there was one other thing scheduled for the day. Your Majesty, Amod bowed. Captain Zaradnik has arrived for her audience. Draudilin nodded. We shall see her now. The marshal rose and turned, nodding to the soldiers at the door. Baroness Zaradnik entered with Countess Corlin, who had been waiting outside all day just in case the court summoned her over one thing or the other. Behind them came 6 elder liches in 2 columns. Draudilin watched as her courtiers did their best not to back away from their advance. The Sorceress Kingdom's delegation came to a stop 5 meters from the base of Draudilin's dais. 2 curtsies and 6 bows were performed in perfect unison before her. Your Majesty, Lady Zaradnik's mellow voice drifted up to Draudilin's throne. I hope the evening finds you well. It's been a productive day, Draudilin said. And we suspect that you are about to become very busy. You may raise your heads. Indeed, Your Majesty, the Baroness said. We have come to review our strategy going forward and receive your approval to commence our offensive. Very well. Show us. The 6 elder liches came forward simultaneously, unrolling a huge map over the floor between them. They proceeded to place markers on the map, and Draudilin's courtiers overcame their wariness to curiously examine the arrangement. Lady Zaradnik examined the room while they did so. Where is Lord Tian? She asked. Ina glanced at Draudilin, who nodded in response. The Prime Minister nodded to the guards behind the throne, who went to retrieve Sabos from the corridor behind the hall. Once he arrived to stand by the throne, the Baroness briefing commenced. This will be the disposition of our forces in 2 days' time, Your Majesty. Lady Zaradnik gestured at the map. To take advantage of the ongoing deluge, we will advance in 3 days. The first phase will involve the liberation of Rivergarden. Draudilin watched as the elder liches started moving markers across the map. Enough elder liches to wipe a city off of the map, and they're being used to move wooden tokens atop it. If the objective is Rivergarden, she asked, then why is the advance beginning from the north and the south? The beastmen's posture over the last few days indicates that they will initially retreat and regroup rather than stand and fight. We hope to push them out of Rivergarden without a fight by taking advantage of that posture and making their position untenable before they realize what is going on. Without a fight? Salacia furrowed her brow. Should you not be destroying those filthy beastmen at every opportunity, Captain? As always, Your Excellency, Lady Zaradnik replied, we would like to minimize damage to the Draconic Kingdom and its citizens. Fighting in urban centers is chaotic and presents unnecessary risks to the residents. We can always eliminate the beastmen when they're out in the open. The elder liches stopped moving the markers and stepped back. Draudilin leaned forward. The Sorceress Kingdom's lines had engulfed Rivergarden and advanced to the first major road past the highways on the eastern banks of the Forst and Bileus. This is what the situation should ideally look like 2 days after the beginning of the offensive. Progress will be relatively slow since we're ensuring that no beastman is overlooked. What then? Draudilin asked. At this point, we'll be watching the beastmen for their reaction while continuing our advance. How we do so ultimately depends on how the beastmen conduct their defense. The Sorceress Kingdom's general staff does expect them to make a stand before we reach their headquarters at Corin on the lake, however. So things will be a mystery after the first few days. At this point in time, Your Majesty. After the first few days, we should have a better picture of how things will develop. That's understandable enough, Draudilin nodded, but the air about you suggests that you have something more to discuss. The Baroness took her attention away from the map to look Draudilin straight in the eye. A wave of gooseflesh crept over her. It concerns the fashion in which this advance is conducted, Your Majesty. The fashion? Yes. Thus far, we have operated as an undead horde. The opponent we face now is far more capable and resilient. It may be best to thoroughly demoralize them. From the benches on her right, Salacia snorted. If it's the beastmen, why should it matter? Scare them to death if you must. Several people immediately voiced their agreement. Drawdillan suppressed a sigh. That girl, she still doesn't get it. As a follower of the 6 great gods, Salacia considered all non-humans as enemies to be destroyed. This was even with the Draconic Kingdom having amicable relations with the aquatic demi-humans off its shores. What she didn't understand was that all souls in Drawdillan's domain were in her keeping, be they beastman, human, or anything else. What the Baroness was asking for was permission to crush the spirits of the beastmen in every way possible short of harming the Draconic Kingdom's citizens. To anyone else, it would be considered a strange thing to ask of the sovereign of a nation that had been overrun by its aggressive neighbors, but, somehow, she knew that it mattered here. Drawdillan closed her eyes and took a deep breath. How much would it help? How much would it hurt? Could she control the outcomes? On a mundane level, at least, Lady Zaradnik was asking that the Draconic Kingdom not spread any unsettling information no matter what the Sorceress Kingdom's army did. That much, she was sure she could keep under her thumb, but the rest? What are the risks should you continue the way that you have? Drawdillan asked. Considering our opponent, the Baroness answered, not breaking their will to fight will result in more effective resistance on their part. It didn't matter with the civilian tribes, but it will make a substantial difference moving forward. Additionally, your subjects may begin contributing to the defense of their territories. Are you saying that our people would turn against us? Ina's tone mirrored the other courtiers' expressions of incredulity. Lady Zaradnik glanced to either side. Not against the Draconic Kingdom, Your Excellency, she said. But they would against an undead horde. Reports from our infiltrators indicate that their fighting spirit is still very high. The recent movements by the beastmen actually have them thinking that the theocracy has finally arrived to drive out their captors. The theocracy. The corner of Ina's mouth twitched. Following the Sorceress Kingdom's arrival, sentiment for the theocracy had hit rock bottom in the Draconic Kingdom's liberated territories. They had essentially been a tributary of the theocracy, and the theocracy had failed to protect them. Ironically, the lands still under beastman occupation still expected the theocracy to come to the rescue. So you're saying that the people are more than willing to resist the undead, Amod said. Won't this increase in aggressive behavior not encourage them to resist even more? Not if our forces scare them witless, Your Excellency, the Baroness replied. Ideally, the citizens will cower in their homes until everything is over. That would make it far easier for us to deal with the beastmen. She said right? Just what the hell is she going to do? Baroness Zaradnik's generally polite and calm demeanor only made thinking about it all the more terrifying. From the looks of it, Drawdillan wasn't the only one that took note of her slip. Her courtiers bore unsettled looks. Countess Corlin was all smiles. Did she do it on purpose? Let's continue the way we have for now, Drawdillan told her. We can review the situation after Rivergarden is retaken. Very well, Lady Zaradnik lowered her head. Does this mean that the other parts of the offensive that we reviewed have Your Majesty's approve? The Baroness straightened and her hand went to her ear. Drawdillan's courtiers looked at one another in confusion. After a few seconds, her chestnut eyes narrowed. What happened? Drawdillan asked after she lowered her hand again. A report from one of our infiltration teams. They say that Lara is being deployed to suppress your subjects. What? Drawdillan shot to her feet. Outraged expressions rose from her court. How did that garbage from Reistais enter my country? Is it not native to the Draconic Kingdom, Your Majesty? No, Drawdillan's lip curled. We made sure that it cannot grow here. I see. Either way, it is not the same as the variety cultivated in Reistais as a recreational drug. What's being distributed is a wild species which is orders of magnitude more potent. It could have come from anywhere. Drawdillan lowered herself back into her seat. Her fingers drummed steadily on her armrest as she wrestled down the fury welling within her. It wasn't any human sensation, her draconic blood was boiling at the violation of her domain. Do it, she said. The hall quieted down. Your Majesty? Purge these interlopers from my domain, Draw Dylan said. Do what you must. Audible swallows sounded from the collection of ministers and their aides. Draw Dylan had not issued her command as Queen Auriculus. She had done so as the black-scaled dragon lord. The Baroness lowered her head, spreading her skirts in a smooth curtsy. By your Majesty's will,